This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Yo, this is Sharmane from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Sharmane, aka Mixed Girl Mane. And if you've been with me for a while, you know that I kind of slowed down a little bit on the podcasting side while I was dealing, and still am dealing with some major depression and some heavy grief over the loss of my cat Ronan. This last month has been kind of a difficult month. It started out with my cat Revan, my oldest cat of 5, being really sick and having to take him to the emergency room. A week later, my middle cat Ronan also became very sick, totally unrelated reasons. They're just both getting old. Revan has been responding to his medications, which has been great. Ronan did not respond to his medications, and while we were still having hope that we were going to be able to find the problem and at least give him a better quality of life and extend his life for a period of time, it turned out that that was not the case. And we lost him a week ago. Fuck. And as you can see, I'm still not really able to talk about it too much without getting pretty emotional, which is hard to share with people, but just trying to be transparent, I guess, so that you know that if I do slow down or if I do end up taking a break, that I have some real reasons or feelings behind it. Even though Militantly Mixed is what brought me out of my last case of major depression, I'm really fighting another bout of major depression right now. I mentioned on the show several times that I do suffer from chronic persistent depression, and occasionally, like everybody, like most people, I do also get these extra doses of major depression, totally different, separate mental health issues, but it's what I'm dealing with, and so I'm fighting that off right now, which is why I'm trying not to slow all the way down or take a full break from the shows, because the shows are what brought me back last time. I'm just really struggling with the effort at the moment. It's one of the symptoms of depression. Sometimes it's almost physically difficult for you to do activities of any kind, and that's kind of what I'm fighting right now. So at least on Militantly Mix, I haven't missed an episode, but I did miss my intro last week. I wasn't able to do a normal intro. I did miss an episode of Blurred Comics last week because I was so sick. I haven't been taking care of myself very well through the loss of Ronan. So I also got sick, and I didn't really have a voice last week. So it's coming back. I'm still coughing and still achy and everything like that, but yeah, I'm coming back. It'll just be the way things are for a little while. I'm really excited, though, to share this week's guest with you. But before I do that, I want to mention one of the things that has been a happy thing for me over the last week or so is I was able to meet a friend in person for the first time. Gerald Jones from what was originally the Buyback podcast, the voice of Black business. And now I think he's changing the name of the show to just the voice of Black business with Gerald Jones. He and I met through the Black Podcasters United group last year. And I started listening to his show because the topics on his show speak directly to some of the things I'm trying to do in my own life. So I became a fan of his show, and by extension, a fan of him. I started reaching out to him, and he was able to advise me before I started doing my public speaking engagements last year. And then through that, we just developed a friendship, shared support system, mixed or Black podcasters. We also share a lot of the same podcasting friends and everything like that. So he was here in town in Los Angeles last week, and we were able to meet up for lunch, which was awesome. We had really good falafel and really good conversation, and it was really like seeing an old friend after a really long time, even though we'd never met in person. We've been engaging for at least close to maybe 6 to 8 months at this point, since I haven't quite hit an anniversary date for the shows. But he's just a person that I'm excited for his success. He was excited for my success. He's really supportive. and it was nice. It was a great time. You can see a photo of us on both the Militantly Mixed and the Blurred Comics Instagrams right after we had our lunch together, and it was just nice. Through the Black Podcasters United group, I've developed some really great podcasting relationships. The podcasting world can be kind of small, especially the Black podcasting world or the of color podcasting world. But Gerald has been a great support. I'm excited for his success as well. And along with the other people who you've heard me talk about from time to time, the Why So Serious podcast with Brandon and Devin Carr. Mike Hassoun also has been a guest on this show. Stephanie from Mocha Minutes has been a guest on Blurred Comics, and I've been guests on their shows as well. Derek Jones from the Single Simulcast podcast. It's just so many good people. Old Man Wade also, another one, and we're all connected now, and we're supporting each other, and we're excited for each other's success, and it doesn't feel like competition, and it's awesome. So that's the happy thing that I would like to talk about this week, just because it's been a tough time. So it's nice to have that ray of sunshine in the midst of everything else that I am going through. But let's move on to the show. So this week, I'm trying to continue on in the Mixed Race Women of Color podcasters for Women's History Month. Luckily, my first 2 weeks of this month, I had guests, both Jackie and Ginger, or people that I met through the WOC podcasters group, also on Facebook. So these are the two social podcasting groups that I get the most out of personally: Black Podcasters United and WOC Podcasters. The mainstream podcasting groups aren't necessarily as supportive. You might get some technical knowledge or things like that, but when it comes to sharing about your show specifically, or in my case, the topics of my show, I'm told my show is too political because it deals with race, which my show isn't political. If you listen, you know it's about experience, and just because we're of color doesn't mean that our experience is political. So it's nice to have these safe havens, the WOC Podcaster Group and the Black Podcasters United groups to just connect and support each other and be excited for the types of shows that people are out there doing. So Jackie and Ginger were my first two guests this month, and we are continuing on with Tangia Renee. She has two shows. That's What She Did, which is her Women's History Month show. It's an annual show or a seasonal show where they talk about women of color that have had success or endeavors that you may never have heard of. So that's one of her shows. And her other show, which is the one that I connected to first before we spoke, is the Skin You're In show, which is a WOC based fitness and wellness podcast. She starts off her show very open and transparent about her own life and her own struggles with her fitness and her wellness and her family life and things. And then from there she jumps into more expert based and tips and tricks and things like that, with a primary focus on women of color. So it's a really good show and it's on all the platforms. So look for it if you are seeking that out. But she is a mixed race woman who identifies as Afro-Latina, and we get into how her mixed heritage and cultural upbringings feed into her identity as a woman today, and also just how being a woman of color has to deal with fitness and wellness differently than what we see in the mainstream. And when we say mainstream, unfortunately, we are saying white because that is what's available to us. So it was a great conversation. The strange thing about this one is that I usually pre-screen all of my guests, but with everything that I had going on and with her busy schedule as well, we basically were just able to schedule the interview outright. And so we didn't have a lot of getting to know you time before we started recording. Once we turned off the recorder, though, we continued to talk for another couple hours that night. And it was really great. It was, to steal the term that I got from Allison Hart from a previous episode, it was a medicine conversation. We just shared our individual experiences and our family stories and sort of work stories and inspiration things. And next thing you know, it's two more hours have gone by in our conversation. So it was really great to get to know Tangia Renee. I am excited for her success and growth as well, and I'm glad and grateful to have her on the show to just offer another perspective, another experience of mixed race women out there. So let's continue on with this Women's History Month Mixed Race Women of Color podcasters thing, and I'll try to get back into sort of the normal flow. If you listen to the show, you can sponsor us through Patreon and PayPal. PayPal.me/MilitantlyMix, Patreon.com/MilitantlyMix. You can also Google us if you want to find all of our things. The support does help, and we really appreciate it. But I think with everything I've talked about so far, it's probably best to just go ahead and go on to the show. So thank you to my audience and to my guests for bearing with me while I'm dealing with the stuff I'm dealing with right now. I'm trying not to take breaks or let y'all down, but I'm also trying to be aware that self-care is important as well. So if I do end up taking a little bit of breaks, I hope you understand in advance. And until then, just thank you for your continued support of the show. And without further ado, let's go on to my interview with Tangia Renee. All right, and we're back. And to continue on in this month's Mixed Race Women of Color podcasters, I am joined this week by Tangia Renee, who, like me, is several podcasts that they're putting out, that she's putting out. So why don't you, Tangia, introduce yourself to our audience, and then let's get going.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sharmane. So my name is Tangia Renee. I am a speaker. I am a PR strategist, certified health coach, and personal trainer, operating under my own brand, TangiaRenee.com, where I work with women to help them feel incredible in their bodies and get real about their health. I'm also a podcaster, hosting 2 shows, the Skin You're In podcast, and That's What She Did podcast as well.
So the Skin You're In podcast is the one that I've heard so far, a few episodes, and you go in transparent, real personal. You tell a story about how you were raised, your fathers, both, I would assume it's okay to say both fathers.
Yep.
Because my husband is adopted, but he didn't know he was adopted by his father, by his dad. His mom is his biological mom. He did not know his dad was not his father until he was older, and so now that's how he distinguishes them, as one is his dad and one is his father. The dad is the guy who raised him. And you said something like that too on your show, and I was like, oh, I get that now, because I didn't understand it when we got together, but I get it now that I've been in that family. So why don't we talk a little bit about what your ethnic background is, and then what you understood about who you were mixed wise growing up.
Sure. So I identify as Afro-Latina. More specifically, my ethnic background is my mom identifies as Hispanic. God help me.
I will put a link in the show notes to explain to everybody the difference between Hispanic and Latin, because I have a whole thing. I know my grandma still says she's Oriental, and I'm like, Grandma,
stop saying that.
You don't have to be a dish. Yes. You can be a whole ass person.
Yes, exactly. I'm always like, Mom, those aren't people. It's just a word that the government made up. Doesn't mean anything. She's like, I am Hispanic and I am a citizen of the world. And that's all I need to know. And I'm like, okay.
Okay,
so
Mom.
Whatever. I love you, Mom. She's probably never gonna listen to this. So she identifies as Hispanic. We are multi-ethnic Latino, hailing from all over Latin America, and some Spanish from Spain in there as well, on my mom's side. And my father is African American, identifying as Black.
And you are very light skinned.
Yeah.
Too. Do you get that from both sides or from the Hispanic side?
You know what is hilarious is I am lighter complected than both of my parents.
Oh, you gotta love genes, I swear.
I don't know where the super light gene came from, but I inherited it, which is just funny because it makes me like I am an Afro-Latina. Like, you would think that my father is Black, my mom is Latina, and she's darker complected than I am. In fact, oftentimes people assume that my mom is Native American because, especially in the summertime, her skin is just this bronze color. She has dark, black hair, and my hair is even like on the camera looking at each other now, it looks black. My hair isn't black. It's when I was born, I have like blonde and red streaks, natural streaks throughout my hair. So it's
Okay.
even more, it's different. Like
Like that's got to come from the Spanish side or
yeah,
something somewhere.
it's got to. So I just pulled those genes and I ended up lighter complected than almost everyone in my family, except I have a couple of cousins who are half white and
Mm.
they just look white. Like they have like strawberry blonde
Oh,
hair and blue
really?
eyes.
Are you the only of your both of your parents?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm the only child of my parents' marriage, and then my mom remarried when I was 4 or 5. And
Hmm.
so all of my younger siblings are of that marriage.
Right. Okay. So you don't even have anybody to kind of compare, see what would happen, what would have
No,
happened with.
it's just me.
Because I have a half sister who looks just like me at her every age she has been. I have looked exactly the same, except for she looked like a white blonde version of me, and it's
Mm,
really weird to see my face if I was
with
gonna be a
blonde
white
hair.
girl. Yeah, yeah, it's very weird. And then my brother, my full brother, and my half brother both look Mexican or some kind of Asian mix. Like
Hmm.
they're just it's just, well, the half Mexican one looks Mexican, but the half Asian and black one, like myself, he looks like Sean Lennon or something like that. Like you, that kind of
Yeah.
vaguely white, vaguely Asian sort of look. So that's interesting. That oh, okay, so you do describe yourself as Afro Latina,
Mhm.
but not Afro Latina from your mother being Afro Latina, but the combination of
The
African American Asian.
combination.
Okay,
Yep.
that's how you break it out.
Mhm. That's how I break it out. I mean, and I know that for some people that's controversial. And
Hey,
some
that's
people are
what this
not going to
show's
like
about.
it.
Let's get into it.
And I just feel like I don't care. Like I get to define my identity for myself. And as a
Right.
woman of color, I don't need other people, particularly people of color, telling me who I can and cannot be.
Hmm.
And in this day and age, it is the most encompassing terminology I can find
Yeah.
that allows for both identities to exist in the same space. And as a mixed person, you're struggling with that on every
Oh,
avenue
little.
is
Yeah.
what am I? Because, and you're constantly being asked, what are you?
I know.
And it's like this long thing. Well, I'm half black and I'm half Latina. And then, like the term Latino, like when I was growing up, people didn't say Latino, Latina. They
Mm-mm.
said Hispanic. And I
Mm-hmm.
never liked that word. And it wasn't until I got into college that like Latina was really an accepted word.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I started using it and I would say, well, I'm half black and I'm half Latina. And then I would have to explain Latina to people. And then it was just like a thing, like this thing.
Yeah.
you
And
know?
that gives you a shorthand because otherwise you're going to take 20 minutes to describe what you
Exactly.
already feel. Yeah. And as if it's not complicated enough for whenever you feel more black or more
Right.
Latin or whatever.
And yes, exactly. So I would choose that term because it feels the most encompassing to who I am as a person. And I understand why it's going to be not accepted by some people. By using that term, I'm not saying that I'm black. I'm certainly not black presenting, and I don't believe that my experience as a mixed woman in America is the same as like a black woman's experience in America.
Right.
I totally understand that it's not the same. I totally understand and acknowledge that I have light skin privilege and I have seen that play out in
I,
real time in my life and I
me too.
understand. But I'm choosing to use the term because again, it's just the most encompassing to who I am and so that's what I'm going to do and I'm not
Right.
going to apologize for it.
Are you seen often? Are you clocked as being half black from black folks?
It depends. So black folks will typically say you're black
Right.
or you're
Same for
half
me.
black, right? Like they will immediately clock me.
Hmm.
And it's like it's this funny thing. Like on more than one occasion I've been like minding my own business and just
Someone just
living my
comes up,
life.
you
And
black,
yes,
right?
somebody would come up to me and go, "You're one of us, right?" And I would be like,
I'm so
can you
glad.
explain what you mean by one of us?
I'm
Because of like if
so
you're a
glad.
terrorist, I'm definitely not one of you.
I'm so glad you said it though, because I try to explain that even to me. Like you see how I present, because we are staring at each other right now. I'm a yellow black girl from the hood. I grew up black, but I look like this. So when random black folks come up to me and they're like, "You're black, right?" I'm like, "Thank you." Fine,
Yeah.
you see me, Whereas like a Japanese is never gonna walk up and be like, "You're one of us, right?" They're gonna be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
it's so cute that you think you're one of us." Don't even try it. So like to hear another person kind of have that same experience of just like being racially ambiguous like you and I both present, which depending on who we're standing next to, we could switch
Hmm.
races with our faces. And probably our hair too, because I don't have
Yeah.
like black textured hair, but I can look like I have black textured hair depending on what I do to it. Um,
Yeah, same. I don't have black hair, but if my hair is braided,
mm-hmm.
then it can like pass,
Right.
right? And until I unbraid it. But it's just this weird thing where yeah, I'm passable depending on who I'm standing next to. And for some reason, which doesn't bother me at all, I actually like I'm like, thanks for seeing me. Black people are like, oh, you're black. Like,
It is a
there's
weird thing, right?
yeah.
It's weird how, like, because if white folks come up to me, if it ever were to happen, which it never, ever, ever has, where they're like, "You're part white, aren't you?"
Oh yeah, they won't say that.
They would never say it to me, never once. But if it were to ever happen, I almost feel like I would clutch my pearls and be like, "How dare you?" Like, can you not see that I'm a black woman with yellow skin? Um, like, because like I didn't grow up around white people, so when I started to be around white people, I felt like they were foreign,
Yeah.
even though there
It
seems to be more of them.
yeah, so that it was a different experience for me. So I my childhood wasn't it was unique. It wasn't like bad. It was good, but it was unique in
Mm,
that my stepfather is Saudi. So like me and all my siblings are mixed. We're just mixed with different
different
things,
things,
right?
right?
So my stepfather is Saudi. So I was my dad who raised me is was an immigrant to this country who is a Muslim man, and we traveled a lot because of his job. So we like
Mm,
grew up sort of like expats living in other countries oftentimes.
mm,
And when we would come back to the United States, we were either in Montbello, which in Denver, it's was at a predominantly historically black neighborhood
mm.
because it was redlined when the community was first built.
Okay.
And so that's where my grandparents landed when they moved to Denver from the rural part of Colorado. And so that's where my mom grew up.
Mm,
And then we would either be living there and sometimes we would be like in the suburbs in a like almost exclusively white neighborhood. So I've always been in this gray area around people. So like when you are an American and you travel abroad and you're a person of color, I mean, for the most part, if you're not black, people just don't ask you about race in other countries.
oh,
They
okay.
don't.
Right.
They're just like, what country are you from?
Right.
And that's all they care about. That's the only thing they want to know. And then it's like on to the next thing. But then you come back to the United States and everybody is trying to label you by how how dark are you? Like there's
Right.
different levels, right?
Right.
And so I grew up just being this person that could kind of come in and out of and code switch really quickly because I was raised having to do that because we were either in another country
Right.
or we were in a predominantly black neighborhood or we were in a almost exclusively white neighborhood.
Mm. So when you travel, whenever you lived abroad, and pretty much people just accepted you as American or whatever, did you ever feel? Did you, I'm trying to figure out what you would feel like. What is your? I'm trying to figure out, I guess, if you have like a first generation experience, even though you're from here. You know.
Kind of, yeah, a little bit. Because my stepfather is Saudi. He came here as an immigrant. He moved to the United States he didn't move to the United States. He came on a visa to go to school. He came to
Mm,
college in Denver. My mom was in college. That's how my parents met. And then he ended up getting his residency, the permanent residency, because he married my mom.
Mm.
So built a life here. So yeah, so I have that like one parent who's an immigrant making me sort of this first generation, and I'm the oldest of all of my siblings.
Right.
So I had a lot of those stereotypical fob moments growing up, with like the parent that like yells at you for doing American things that every other kid
right.
is
You're
doing.
like, I was literally born here.
Right, yeah.
I was like, what do you want from me? I know exactly what you're talking about.
Like, how dare I? I would be like, what do you mean? Like,
you know that when you say back home, to me, that's Denver, right? Like...
yeah, he would be like that whole back home thing, and I would be like, this is home here. Like, I was born here. What are you talking about? So there was a lot of those, fob moments who children of immigrants will understand completely. A lot of that stuff. And just like not understanding this, especially as a Muslim man, like not understanding raising this American girl in an American society.
Right.
When he comes from such a conservative society. So there was that whole thing. And then there was this underlying thing of me growing up is like, one of your questions was like, what was my understanding of my ethnicity? I've always known that I was mixed, and I've always known what my mix was. It was never something that wasn't out in the open in my family. There wasn't a reason for it not to be. And it wasn't until really I got into like late middle school, like kind of 7th, 8th grade. And that's when kids are like real assholes about that age,
right,
that I realized that I was seen as different. Because up until then, I was mostly just around my family.
Right.
In an elementary school, everybody's just like, is just a little kid, right? And then you get into middle school and it's a different dynamic. And it wasn't until I was in middle school that I came to understand that there was something different about me because I was mixed race. And that some people really looked down on that.
Right.
Because it was never an issue in my family. Like, on any level, I can't remember being a little kid and even having weirdness about race, any race.
Right.
It was just such a normal thing. And, I'm not the only mixed person in my family.
Right.
My aunts and uncles almost always married somebody else, of a different race. So.
Right. And whenever brown folks move to different places where there's a lot of white folks, and there's no other brown folks.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do?
What are they going to do? Like they're going to partner.
I mean, people got to copulate. What are they going to do? So it was not something that even occurred to me that I needed to be thinking about. And I was probably I was about the 7th grade. The first time somebody called me monkey because of the size of my lips.
Oh, really?
And I remember like being like, what does that mean?
Throwback and a half.
Yeah,
that's somebody's dad.
It was this white kid in one of my classes, and I didn't know what it meant. Like I didn't know enough to even be upset about it. I was like, what's he talking about?
Right.
And then I didn't ask my mom, but I don't remember who I asked about it, and they were like, well, they're saying that you're a monkey, and then like kind of sort of explained blackface to me in a way that you would try to innocently explain it to a child. And so there were a lot of incidents like that from then on through high school of white boys specifically trying to make fun of my lips.
Right. So did that ever shift though? Like as you get into high school so for me, same thing. It started as like 6th grade because we had a fish tank in our classroom where there was a fish who had big old lips. So I was fish lips during that time. And then junior high and it continued on horse lips, fish lips, all the kind of things that talked about me in an animal form. But then by freshman and sophomore year, now my big lips were a prize, a sexual prize.
Yeah.
And it was so hard to try to figure out that the same boys that used to make fun of me in sixth, seventh, eighth grade, all of a sudden by ninth grade, were trying to get at me because of these things that they were making fun of me for. So did you have that transition of being like first made fun of and then exoticized by it?
Yeah. And it happened very quickly, and I was not prepared for it because it happened before I was sexually mature enough
Right.
to process it. So, like in the sixth grade, is when sort of the taunt started. And then I was really like in the seventh grade, I felt a little bit of a shift, but I don't think I even had the language at that point to name it.
Mm-hmm.
And then just over the summer break of seventh grade to eighth grade, and also probably not so much in sixth grade because I wasn't in the country for all of sixth grade. I was only there for part of it. And then the summer of seventh grade is like over the course of a summer, my body just developed.
Same
So
for me.
seventh grade, I was
Seventh
still
grade.
like this very much this like tomboy, awkward stage. Came back to eighth grade looking like a completely different person.
Same to me.
And
Oh my gosh.
was not ready for that.
No. I went from like little nipple hills to like a full ass B
Yep.
cup. And then the
Yep.
girls, even the girls had harassed me because
Yeah.
obviously I was trying to get boys' attention and these weren't real,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, I came back eighth grade. And again, I was gone for the beginning of eighth grade. I think I came back in the middle of the year. Came back to the same school. Again in a predominantly white neighborhood. So my same friends were there from the previous year, but I looked different. And I was taller than all of the other girls. I shot up in that summer like to my full height. I'm 5'7". So in the eighth grade, a 5'7" girl
was
looked
pretty
like
tall.
a teacher. Yeah, it was tall.
Looks pretty tall.
And in fact, I was so tall that like the basketball coach was like, "You need to play basketball." So I just started playing basketball. I was like one of the tallest girls on the team.
Did you have any coordination though, or
I was actually pretty good.
Oh,
Yeah,
good. Well, at least it wasn't just because you were tall.
I found that I was a natural athlete, and I picked up, even though I didn't really like basketball, I picked it up, and I ended up having a good time with it. But I was a completely different person. Like I was the size of the teachers. I was bigger, in fact, than some of the teachers, and I just had like this adult body, and so the boys immediately noticed, and I didn't know what to do with that. Like it was really uncomfortable to me. So I just went through this long tomboy stage. And this was the 90s, and so it was kind of the thing to be tomboy anyway. And so I was like in baggy jeans and flannel shirts all the time.
Yeah.
And even doing that, the boys were still pretty brutal in their sexual innuendos, and to me it was just bizarre because I was the same person. I was still just emotionally, I was a 12, 13-year-old girl emotionally.
Right.
Even though I was regularly mistaken for a 17 or 18-year-old girl.
Wow.
So it was really confusing.
You seemed that much, or you appeared that much older at that age. That
I
had to
did.
have been rough with a lot of the sexualization of you at that age.
Yeah, and it was just gross. I mean, grown men, approaching me on the street. I had grown men. There were so many incidents of men chasing me and following me in public, and just being really freaked out about that. And this was also a time when like Mariah Carey was probably at the height of her career. Like she was really blowing up in this, early mid 90s period.
Music box time period.
Yeah, it was about that time.
Yeah.
And so people would stop me like in the grocery store or on the street and say, "Oh, has anybody ever told you that you resemble Mariah Carey?" And I would just think like, what are they talking about? Because I don't have blonde, honey-colored hair.
Right.
And I don't, we don't look anything alike. Not at all. But she's mixed.
Racially ambiguous face.
She's racially ambiguous. And so that was really about the time when I started constantly being asked about my race.
Right.
I was always aware of it. Like kids in school, once we became friends, would kind of ask me. But again, like even at a young age, mostly the Black kids immediately assumed that I was half Black.
Right.
And it would be other kids that would kind of ask. And then white kids never asked. But if they were going to make racist jokes, I realized really quickly that they assumed that I was like Hispanic, because that was the word that was being used.
Okay.
Or they assumed I was whatever the person was standing next to me.
Right. Right.
And because of that, like they didn't, like I realized right away, probably around the 8th or 9th grade, that they didn't associate me with Blackness. And so they would say very racist things about Black people and be completely comfortable saying them because they didn't think any Black people were in the room.
That is also a very strange part about being mixed, like my family, when you're incognito, and people can just be, show their whole ass in front of you, and you have to be there and say, do I decide in this moment to say, don't say that because I'm Black, too? Or just don't say that because it's racist and not even reveal that you are Black. Like, because what's the important part of the racism in that moment? That a Black person heard it, or that it's racist in general? And I think at that young age, that was hard for me. I did not get that. Like, when that kind of stuff started happening for me, I'd just be like, you do know I'm Black, right? And that was the way I countered the racism, and it took until adulthood before I was like, you do know you're racist, right? It takes... Because no one's there teaching us.
Yeah, agreed. And obviously when you're a 7th, 8th grader, you're not making that up. You're getting it from your house.
Right.
From wherever you're being raised. And like you, I would just say like, well, I'm half Black. That was really a racist thing to say. And it would drop. And it wasn't until adulthood that I would say that's a really racist thing to say. That's really wrong to say. And now I don't identify my race when people are being racist.
Right.
But I find that aspect has not changed. Is for whatever reason, white people don't associate me with Blackness. And so they will oftentimes show their whole entire ass. And what's the worst part about that is when people of color do it.
I know, it's so much more disappointing.
And
like,
then I'm just like, that when a person of color does it, that makes me feel physically sick.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, and this happened recently. I was at a friend's house and they were having this big party. We were like hanging out. And a guest at their party, like somebody they knew, someone I don't know, was there. And we were all sitting around this table kind of talking. And this guy had been, drinking. Everybody had been drinking. So I'm reluctant to say that he said what he said because he had been drinking. I'm like, everybody at the party had been drinking. Right. He was the only one saying racist shit.
Okay.
But we were talking about, I was there with my husband and we were hanging out, and somebody said something about going to Atlanta, and I was like, oh, we were just recently in Atlanta. We were all talking about Atlanta, about how much we had a great time when we were there, and like the things that we did, and da 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 da. And this guy out of nowhere goes, oh yeah, I heard Atlanta is nice, but aren't there a lot of, and he used the Spanish word for the N-word. He said it in Spanish, and everybody kind of paused. And, it was that awkward moment, and he didn't pick up on the social cue. Everybody kind of paused and looked at him. And in that moment, I was like, am I going to do it? Am I going to call him out? Because I was having a really good time, and now I'm not having a good time.
Yeah.
And as I was thinking that thought, he said it again.
Oh, come on.
I was like, well, now I have to.
Double down on it. Like, in case y'all didn't hear me.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And I think that's what he thought, because everybody paused. And it was like in his mind, oh, they didn't hear me, so let me say it again.
Wow.
And he said it again. And again, everybody just looked at him. And then that's when I was like, why did you just say that? And I said, do you have a problem with black people? And he goes, oh, I don't, no, I'm not racist. And I said, well, then why are you saying the N-word?
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, you know how we be, like, you know how we are,
like
but
we
we're
could
just
just
with
do
our,
it.
like, we're just with our people. And I said, no, I don't use that word ever. I don't ever use that word. So why are you saying it unless you don't like black people? And it was like dead silent. You know, like when the record scratches?
Yeah.
Like, that's what was happening.
Okay.
And he kind of backed off, and then he was like he looked around to see if anybody was going to support him, and nobody did. Everybody just looked at him.
You hope
and then
does.
he backpedaled and was like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. I apologize if I offended you. And I was like, don't apologize for offending me. Apologize for being racist.
Right. If I hurt your feelings, apology drives me insane.
I know. Yeah,
what is wrong with people?
That has happened more times than I can count. And I think I consider that to be part of my privilege, is being a light-skinned person, is that I can go into those spaces. And even when I don't want to call it out, I feel like I have a responsibility to,
right?
Because a racist person is going to be racist, but they're going to watch what they say if there's a black person in the room.
Right.
Right. And so they're always saying racist things around people that they can get away with it.
Yeah.
And I think, even though I love everybody who I know that was there at that party that day, sitting around that table, I believe that they're not racist. And you could tell from their reaction that they didn't like what he was saying. They didn't agree with it, but they also didn't feel like they were supposed to do something about it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, allyship, whether it's like a person of color allyship or a white person, is like, it has to come from everybody. It can't just come from the people that are being affected directly of the racism.
Yeah, so that's why now as an adult, and when those situations happen, I don't bring up my ethnicity. I don't talk about my own blackness, because then they immediately dismiss it as, oh, well, you're black. And of course I would never say that if I knew a black person was here.
If I knew, yeah.
Right, and that you're missing the point.
Right.
And
I think that's fair to not use that moment to come out as mixed, you know. I do think that's a fair moment.
Yeah, and it was weird. And I was able to kind of talk to some people after that, because it just got real awkward. And then so he left not that long after that incident happened. And then somebody at the party was like, hey, I apologize for him. And I was like, don't apologize for him.
Educate him.
Yeah, like, you didn't say it. I was like, but had I not been here, I don't think you would have called it out. I think no one would have said anything, and he would continue thinking that it's okay to say those things just as long as there isn't an obviously black person in the room.
Right.
And I was like, that's the thing that I find disappointing about the entire situation. Like, hey, if it happens and I'm there, I have a responsibility to say something about it, but everybody else does too.
And
it's not just because I'm the only person in the room who happens to be mixed race with black.
Right.
Like, you guys aren't, but you knew it was wrong.
Right.
Like, you knew it was wrong.
Right.
So that's the thing, like, that gets me, is when, like, other people of color either A, are being very clearly racists, and specifically being anti-black or anti-whatever particular race they're hating on that day. But when a person of color lets it slide because it's easier.
Yeah, and see, that's the other thing too. Like, it seems way more damaging as you're going home. If you're the person of color that let it slide, and you go home and you got to think about that moment and think about all the white people that might have been around and witnessed it and saw you let it slide. And now they're not going to be as stressed out when they hear it in the future, because they're like, well, I know there's one person of color, you know, fill in the blank person, who let it go, so I'm gonna go ahead and let it go. And then who knows what fallout, like, that would make me feel sicker as time went on if I didn't deal with it right in the moment. And yet at the same time, I'm like, why is it always my responsibility to be the one, you know? It's
frustrating. It's just like one of the many layers of things that you deal with when you are racially ambiguous, right? Like, and that's that's been a big theme for me throughout my life is, yes, I'm mixed, but I'm not just mixed, I'm racially ambiguous.
Right.
And people don't know how to categorize me. And, I was sharing with you before, recently I was in Thailand, and Thai people were walking up to me and just started speaking Thai. And I don't, to my knowledge, I don't have any Asian heritage, to my knowledge.
Right.
So the fact that people think that I might be Thai is mind blowing.
Right.
But it happens almost everywhere I go.
And it's funny because we and I are looking at each other. When you said that, before I'm looking at someone who I could distinguish as half black, and then you said that, and I was like, oh damn, now she's Asian. Like the second you said it, your face shifted, and then a little bit ago you kind of laughed and you put your hands up in front of your face, and then you were black again, and it was just like, this is what happens to our faces. This is why I'm Filipino or Mexican in LA, or I'm Dominican or Puerto Rican in New York. Like our faces are so,
it's crazy,
awesomely
like
weird.
In Denver, if you're brown, it's automatically assumed that you're Mexican. So in Denver, I'm Mexican. You're right. In New York, I'm Puerto Rican. When I was in New York recently, people were like, "Hey, mami!"
Yeah, they
like,
just start speaking Spanish.
To me? I'm from Denver, dude. I don't know what. Like what?
I think that's the why when someone just say you're black, right? You're like, thanks for catching any part of it, because damn, you don't know how often I am everything but.
Everything. Like I went with my sister once to this Korean restaurant, and we sit down, we order. It was one of those. What's it called? I think it's called hot pot or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like it's like
cooked in front of you.
Yeah. And they started bringing over this stuff that I have never seen before. And finally, I asked the waiter, I was like, what is that? And he gave me this crazy look, and he said it, and it was this Korean word, and I was like, I don't know what that is. And he like stepped back from the table, and he looked at me, and he looked at my sister, and he looked at me again. He goes, you're not Korean? Like in an accusation.
Right.
And I was like, no. He goes, oh, I thought you were Korean. And the way he said it was like, how dare you not be Korean?
It's like you've disappointed his ancestors some kind of way.
I disappointed him. And that happens with this like surprising regularity. With like people assume that you're whatever they assume that you are when you're just living your life. Like I'm just trying to have dinner with my sister.
Right.
And then they're disappointed in you, or there's like there's almost this sense of betrayal about like, how dare you? And I'm like, I don't know what like cultural responsibility you just laid at my feet, but I can't help you with that.
When I was growing up in Long Beach, there's a lot of Mexican kids, a lot of black kids and stuff, and the Mexicans, because I had crunchy curly hair and I stacked my bangs because it was the time, it was the 90s. I had this one kid go, you should be proud that you look Mexican. And I'm like, I don't think I look Mexican. Like, I don't know. What am I supposed to be proud? He's like, aren't you proud, that you're one of us because we're a proud people? And I'm like, I can't be proud of who my actual people are. I got to be proud of these, like, hypothetical people that I just happen to look like if I stand next to you. Because if I walk over there to the Hmong kids, I'm going to be Hmong in a second. Like whatever. I can't do anything about it. It is weird, that responsibility that gets laid at your feet just because somebody else confused you.
Yeah, it's so strange. And I don't ever want to, I don't really know what to do with it. Like, I don't want to offend them because I respect that at a moment's notice, they were just ready to like welcome me, right? They were just ready to be like, oh, my people, like, let me bring you the stuff from the back of the refrigerater that we don't serve.
You were about to get a Korean discount, but you weren't Korean enough.
And so I was like, I appreciate that, like, immediate recognition of like, we are in this together. And so I want to treat that with, care.
Right.
But I also like, I'm not, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with that moment of realization when they feel disappointed. And then I'm like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But what am I apologizing
What are you apologizing for?
There needs to be this other word where you kind of feel bad that they are disappointed, but you're still super proud of who you are. And
Yeah,
accident, sorry? Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Sorry.
It's so
It's just this
awkward.
weird thing that I'm constantly navigating, and it comes at like it never stops. It comes at the oddest moments. Like one time I don't remember where I was flying, but I was catching a flight connecting in Miami, and I'm sitting there and I can see this guy that like keeps kind of smiling at me, and then um he said something to me, but he was kind of far away and I didn't hear him. And I couldn't tell if he was speaking Arabic or I'm sorry, English or Spanish. Um, but then I said, "Excuse me," and he goes, "Oh, you're not Cuban." And he was like so angry with me, and I was like, "No, I'm not Cuban." Like I'm so, like, and again, I'm sorry. Like I'm just trying to connect. I'm trying to catch a flight, like you're trying to catch a flight, bro. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what you want from me right
How are
now.
you mad at me because you got the wrong idea?
So it's just this weird thing, this weird gray area that I'm always trying to navigate, and I never feel prepared for.
Right. Because
So
even though it happens all the time, you think, I'm going to be ready next time. But they throw you. They throw you in some kind of way. I had this Arabic dude I was buying t-shirts in New York, like the first time I ever went to New York. So I was buying t-shirts to go back home. And he starts speaking Spanish to me. And I go, I don't speak Spanish. And he said, what kind of Puerto Rican doesn't speak Spanish? And I go, a black and
the,
Japanese one? And
the
he
kind
goes,
that's not Puerto Rican.
right. And so then he starts speaking Japanese to me, and I was like, whoa, 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 slow down. I'm like, my Japanese is not that good. And then so he says a couple things, and I say a couple things, and then at the very end, I pay him, I get my stuff, and I say shukran as I'm leaving, and he goes, oh, Arabic you speak. And I'm like, well,
Oh,
my husband.
how dare you?
I was like, it's like one word. I know like a couple cuss words and
Yeah,
some phrases in Arabic because my best friend was Arabic and my husband's half Arabic.
yeah.
But but it was fun.
Yes,
It was
like
like
with my stepdad being Arabian, like I don't like my Arabic is not great, but I understand, right? So
mm-hmm.
and I look Arabian. But because of my racial ambiguity, like I was just in Saudi and we were just in the UAE, they they assume that I'm from the Middle East, but they
Okay.
can't quite figure out what kind of Arab
Where?
I am just
Right.
by looking at me. So they're constantly like, Arabe? Are you Saudi? Or like,
Mm.
are you Saudi or are you Moroccan? Are you, because that determines like how they're gonna talk to you. You know,
Right.
there's like
If
kind
you're
of different.
cool or if you're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
right.
Like, what kind of Arab are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out. I can see it when they're looking at me. They're trying to figure it out. Like they automatically assume that like I'm part of the Arabian people, but like which one are you?
I need to know if I can like you or not.
Yeah, like
Tell
I need
me.
to know how good we're gonna get along right now. That's the only other place it happens. But you know, in all like my experience throughout the Middle East is that they're such welcoming people. I've never actually had any kind of an issue with
That's good.
anybody
Yeah.
there, and then they're confused. So like they hear me speak and they're like, "You're American?" Like
Mm.
with my American accent, they're like, "You're American?" Like it's so shocking to them, and they never ask me about race. Like
Yeah.
nothing. It's like I mean, I guess it could have happened and I just don't remember it, but I can't recall a single time being abroad, whether it was somewhere in the Middle East or
Right.
another country, and being asked my race.
Yeah, the only time that because I think all other countries are more nationalistic than we are, and we're
Mm.
like we have to be divided here. We because I think even in Canada, Canadians always said, "Oh, you're American." You know, they didn't even say like what thing are you like, and
Yeah,
they're
what kind of American
what
are
kind of
you?
American are you? Like they didn't do that, or like the stupid question, what do you call your African Americans in Canada? Like that kind of stuff didn't happen there, but here you can't help it. I will say though, in terms of Asians, most of us can tell each other apart, like by different head shape and eye shape and all kinds of things. But the Koreans occasionally can fool the Japanese, and my grandma, because the Koreans and Japanese don't get along, my grandma will get so mad if she mistakes a Korean for a Japanese.
Oh, wow.
So like if we're at a Japanese restaurant and a Korean kid is the waiter and they come up and they're, then my grandma speaks Japanese and they're like, "Oh, I don't speak Japanese, I'm Korean." And then my grandma's like, "I'm very upset." Then she just like she gets really she gets really mad cuz she'll go like, "Why are you here? Why? Why are you in a Japanese place? Because you're making everybody think we're the same." And she thinks Americans can tell us apart. So she'll like,
No.
"You're making us look bad." I'm like, "Grandma, we're all Chinese to them. They don't know. It's fine." Or we're whatever Asian was the first Asian they ever met. So if their first Asian was like a white person's first Asian was Japanese, then all of us are Japanese. If not, they're all Chinese. Yeah, but she doesn't get it. And that's the only other time that I think like, yeah, nowhere else have I ever been. People always want to know if I'm American. If I'm in Europe, they want to distinguish me from a Canadian. Are you Canadian or are you American?
Mm-hmm.
And then everywhere, I've only really been to like Canada and Europe and Mexico and Caribbean and stuff like that. So it's really just a question of, am I American? And even black people from those other places aren't concerned about whether or not I'm black or not. They're concerned about whether or not I'm American. Yeah.
They're not. Yeah, I've met Black Moroccans, Black people from all over Europe and all over, like English people, and they just like they don't care.
Yeah.
Like whatever. It's an amazing thing to me, having grown up traveling that way, which is something I'm so grateful for.
Culturally.
And coming back to the United States and immediately being transported to this place where like the color of my skin is so important. And of late I've gotten more questions about it from Black people, which has been interesting. Like it hasn't been like accusatory or anything like that.
What else are you?
Yeah, but I think what's happening is that because previously I would get weird, awkward questions from white people about my race.
Sure, yeah.
And now Black people are kind of asking a little bit more, and it's not invasive. It's really, it seems to be this curiosity around people who are Black people that are Black presenting, becoming more curious about mixed people and like wanting to know a little bit more about what that experience is like. And just sort of being curious about that. There's only been one or two times when someone has been like angry with me for identifying even a little bit with Blackness. Really? As a person who's non-Black presenting. And it's only happened over social media. I've never had someone to my face.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and it hasn't happened that much, really. It's only been a couple of times where somebody was like, "You're not Black," and I'm like, "I didn't say that I was Black." Again, I understand that I'm not Black presenting, and I have a very different experience in this country than someone who is clearly a Black presenting person. I understand that I have privilege because of the color of my skin. Like I said before, I've seen that play out in real life. I can give you a real harsh example. I live in Colorado, obviously. Like, this is where my family is from. And I have some first cousins that are mixed just like me, same racial background, except my dad is Black, my biological father is Black, and their biological mother is Black. So their dad and my mom are siblings. They're a little bit younger than me, but this weekend, as a family, we had all gone up to the mountains to go snowboarding for the day. And we went to Vail, and if anybody that's familiar with Vail, it's one of the ritzier, very white. I mean, all ski slopes are very white, yeah. But this one is like pretty up there, like in terms of like overall whiteness. So we were there, and we had come down. We'd been snowboarding all morning. It was getting close to lunchtime, so we put up our snowboards and we were going to go get lunch before the lines got really long. But my cousin and I needed to go over to the ATM. So we were walking over to the ATM, and he was walking maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead of me. We walk up to the ATM. It's an outside ATM, like one of those ones that's just on the side of a building.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an older white man at the ATM already. So he was doing his thing. And when he turned around, my cousin and this man almost collided with each other. But my cousin stepped back and he goes, "Oh, excuse me." And the man looked up and looked at him in the face and said, "Get out of my way, you N-word." And I was like, I was so stunned that I just froze. Like, we both just froze. And it probably didn't look like we were together because he was a couple of paces ahead of me and I don't look like him.
Right.
His skin is much darker than mine. And that same man walked around my cousin and I was standing right there. So either I was going to have to move or he was going to have to move. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "Oh, excuse me, miss," and walked around.
Wow. Are you serious?
Yeah, it ruined the whole day.
Of course.
For both of us. Like, we were both sick to our stomachs after, like we didn't eat lunch. We didn't snowboard for the rest of the day. He was like, "I'll never come here again."
Right. You'll never forget that happened in that space.
You'll never forget that moment happened. For what? For doing absolutely nothing. For breathing, for existing.
Right. And it's to me, hearing it's almost as offensive hearing him say, "Excuse me, miss," to you.
Yes.
And you being invisible, who your mixedness being invisible to him,
right,
as it is him say, which also in 2019, it's not like I don't know that people say it, but when you do hear it in 2019,
it's so shocking.
Yeah.
So shocking. And for him to feel that comfortable to just say it was public. There were people milling around. Like, it wasn't a private space. It was public.
Right.
And if there was ever a moment that highlighted my light skin privilege to me, it was that.
Right.
So I understand when some people are like, "Well, you're not really black," and I'm like, wait a second, I'm not saying that I'm having the same experience as you, but you don't get to take any part of my identity from me either. So that has been of late kind of a weird thing to have to navigate, because I've never previously that I can recall had a black person like try to define my identity for me.
Right.
Until, and maybe it's just like a social media thing where people just want to be assholes on the internet.
Yeah, I think people are a lot more comfortable. The only time that has ever happened something similar in terms of a black person making me feel less than black, usually in person, the way it's happened is, just to clarify, if I get pulled over and you get pulled over and you're like, "Yeah, I know that I'm not going to have that,"
I'm very aware of that.
So like, that's kind of the worst it would ever be in person, when I was in when I was a freshman in high school, my best friend at the time, she and I had been best friends for a while, but in 9th grade is when the Return to Africa stuff started getting really popular. And so she became African during that time. And I was no longer black to her. So up until then, I was black. I'm growing up in the hood. My dad is black. She sees my family. But during that time, she made this transition. And she was like, "I can't view you as black anymore." And we stopped being friends because of it. And so that's like the worst of a person deciding for me that my blackness or my relationship to blackness was like gone as far as she was concerned. It was just like all the way gone. But now in social media, I don't get it too often, and I don't know if it's because I'm so forward with my my race stuff, like comes up like as a mixed person, a blah 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 blah, but when it does happen in social media, it is always somebody who I don't know why, but is like almost personally offended by my pro-blackness, because I'm so pale.
Yeah.
So, and I'm like, well, what are you asking me to not be pro-black? you know, because I can't not, because of
Right.
my upbringing and my environment. But also my pro-blackness doesn't necessarily mean that I'm anti-white or anti anything else. It's just that I grew up black.
Hmm.
I just happen to look, you know, pasty.
Yeah, it's I think what I keep coming back to is that in this country, we still in 2019 don't really have the tools
Mm.
to deal with race in a deeply meaningful and inclusive way because we refuse to deal with our racist underpinnings as a
Mm-hmm.
country. So as long as we refuse to acknowledge and accept that um, slavery did in fact happen and the economy in this country was built on
Black
human
bodies.
enslaved labor of
Mm-hmm.
black people, until we're really ready to deal with that and acknowledge and accept it and try to find a way to move forward together, I think we're never really going to have the tools to deal with race on a larger level. And it continues to be the responsibility of people of color to try to solve racism, and it continues to be the responsibility of black people to try to solve anti-blackness when
I
it shouldn't
know.
be that
Shouldn't be
way.
that
And
way.
so we're going to continue, I think, to have these rubs
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, some people are going to be personally offended when somebody who is light skinned wholeheartedly claims their blackness.
Mm-hmm.
And white people are going to be like, why are you doing that? You pass. I've had many white people be like, oh, you pass. And I like,
Like it's the
that's
golden
like,
ticket.
yeah, like it's the golden ticket. And to me, that's like one of the most offensive things that you can say.
So offensive.
like, like, I would rather you be like, I don't like black people to my face than say, oh, you passed.
I know.
Congratulations.
It's like trying to explain to people why saying, I don't even see you as a person of color.
Yeah.
I don't even see you as black, whatever. You're just like, how do you think that is a compliment? Or that it is now so
Yeah.
telling about who you are because you think it's a compliment, you know? Or that you would think I would think it's a compliment. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
must never listen to me if you think I would be okay with
Yeah.
that.
So I think we're going to just continue to find ourselves in these places where it's awkward and it's weird and it's confrontational and
Mm-hmm.
there's conflict around it. I don't think that conflict is a bad thing. I think we need to have more of these conversations, which is going to create conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I think generally conflict is actually a good thing because it reveals what you really think, and it's you have to deal with the hard stuff to move forward. I think that conflict doesn't it's not bad. It becomes toxic when it starts to turn to violence and
Right.
degradation.
Right.
That's when it's toxic. That's what we need to stay away from. But I think you have to continue to have these conversations out in the open
Mm-hmm.
where everybody can hear them and participate in them and process them. Otherwise, we never get past this place.
Right.
You know, and so you know, in the last few years there's been these movements coming forward that have been about helping people really embrace their heritage, really embrace their blackness. Like, you know, hashtag Black Girl Magic, I think, is really a powerful statement
Mm-hmm.
to make. And I love when I see women using that, and, you know, it's on t-shirts and bumper stickers and like whatever. I
Mm-hmm.
love when you see them doing that. And I love that there's spaces now for mixed people um, being unapologetic
Mm-hmm.
in accepting all parts of that identity and wanting to learn more about it and deepen their understanding of it. Um, I think it's a starting point to have those spaces that are like exclusively Black, exclusively mixed, exclusively Latinx, whatever it
Right.
may be. But as people of color, we have to engage. Like,
Yeah.
we have to come together because the larger power structure is not going to allow for it to happen on its own. So we have to be intentional
Mm-hmm.
about bringing these conversations forward, having these conversations, and celebrating each other.
Right.
Right. I absolutely. So I love, like, I celebrate Black Girl Magic. And when I see women doing that and really promoting and trying to support young girls who are Black and saying, you know, embrace your natural hair and love it.
Yeah.
You don't have to straighten it if you don't want to, or if you want to, you want to straighten your hair, then do it. But, you know, you're great either way.
Right.
Really embracing those things. And, I want to see more Latinx people being able to express themselves wholeheartedly in that same way as well. But I think we're getting closer to it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it gets to a place where it's, and maybe particularly with the Latinx community, where they can comfortably speak about the nuance of how many different ethnicities are rolled around inside Latinx people. You know, it seems like you do have to squat up or tribe up, depending on color or location and things like that. And it's something, you know, being on the outside of that, I see, and I have a lot of questions about it because I'm concerned that me not understanding it could cause problems. You know, like I feel like I need to understand the nuance of other people too, so that I don't make mistakes, but also so that I can stop people when I hear them make mistakes. In the same way, at the party that you were talking about, no one standing up and you having to be the representative for, you know, all races, you know, racism, anti-racism warrior type folks, that I could be able to do that on behalf of a group that I'm not necessarily a part of because nobody else is speaking up, you know, that kind of stuff. I think that would be...
It's all very nuanced, and, you know, I think that there's a lot of work that has to happen in non-Black communities of color to address anti-Blackness.
I agree.
Because it exists in every single one of them, whether we want to admit it as or not. And, you know, even like, you know, my mom's side of the family are Latinx, and they don't identify that way.
Yeah.
But, you know, I can recall situations growing up where there was a distinct anti-Black undertone, and it just being considered normal. Like, this is just the way they talked in the old days.
Right. And that's a blanket statement to be like, it's okay.
These are blanket statements, and, you know, now they're things that I would never, ever let slide. And I got to imagine, and I need to ask my mom about this. I haven't. I got to imagine that there was some backlash when she married a Black man.
Yeah, I wonder about that.
I have to imagine that.
If you find out and you want to come back and talk about it, let's get into it.
I'm going to ask her. I mean, it was so long ago. She's like, I blocked that whole marriage out of my brain. I don't remember what happened. Like, okay, Mom.
Got it.
I'm gonna ask her anyway. I mean, knowing my great grandparents, my family, I want to say that there wasn't, and maybe I just have rose-colored glasses about them because, as you know, growing up, I can't remember them saying racist things, but that doesn't mean it never happened.
Right.
But I have to imagine, like, my mom comes from a very small town in Colorado, so I had to imagine there was some kind of backlash. There had to have been.
Yeah.
And in my mom's own stories about race, like, I can remember her saying that when she was little, you know, the family, they always wanted to keep her out of the sun because she tans so easily. And she, like I said, she gets this really bronze color, and people assume that she is, you know, Native American from a tribe, that she's indigenous somehow. And maybe way back in our heritage, there's some indigenous genes in there. It wouldn't surprise me. This is Colorado after all. But, you know, she had talked about when she was a kid, they didn't want her to get dark.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, now as an adult looking back, I'm like, if that isn't anti-Blackness, I don't know what it is.
Right? I know. It's so weird, these things where, like, you think of them as caretaking, but when you really start to pay attention to what was going on, you're like, oh, my childhood, there was so problematic.
And I don't know who would have said that to her, because, you know, she spent a lot of time with my great grandparents who are no longer with us, and I spent a lot of time with them growing up as well, and I can't remember a single time of them saying anything to me about my color or trying to keep me out of the sun, right? If
Right.
anything, they were like, child, go outside.
You've got too much energy.
Yeah. So it's just an interesting thing. And, stories like that are just the tip of the iceberg of things that happen in the Latinx community. It's there, it exists. We have to talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, we need to be honest about it. And I think we also have to give ourselves, I think, permission to grapple with it and acknowledge that you didn't create it.
Right.
Like, it's just been something that's been in the culture, and you can either accept the culture, or you can say, like, these things are problematic and we need to do something about them. But in order to do that, you have to acknowledge that and be honest. You have to tell the truth about it.
Right.
And I think that grappling is starting to happen, but there's still so much work to be done.
Right. We have to give ourselves permission to understand that it's okay to be proud of who we are and where we come from, but that every one of us come from something problematic that we, like you said, that we have to grapple with. And once we can understand that it's okay that things weren't perfect, and we can, understand that we are nuanced and stuff, that puts us on a path, I think, towards at least the collective thing. I think, like you were saying earlier, kind of getting together and celebrating and being, and non-Black people of color needing to step up and step in too, I think is important, because so many of us, especially those of us that are mixed, kind of feel confused by how we aren't more locked armed and like, right. Oh, we both suffer in some way, so why don't we work together to lift each other up? But we, instead we end up falling into the oppression Olympics and who has it worse than the others and stuff like that. So I think, like you're talking about, open conversation, understanding the problematic histories, working on healing what that means, whatever it means for each individual person, that these are the kinds of things that I hope all the stuff that we do, like with the podcasting or conversations with people in public, whatever we're doing, that we're, I hate to say it like this, that we're almost always actively trying to help people get it, even though we're not necessarily responsible for other people. So I don't know. There's times when I feel like I need to be an educator, and there's times when I feel like I just wish I didn't have to.
I mean, it's taxing and it becomes exhausting. And I think when you need to step out of it, and like go incognito, you need to do that for you, so that you can stand up and fight another day. And so that's what I try to tell myself, is like, there are just some days that I do not have the emotional capacity to deal with the racism around me. Like, I just need to. And I'll just say, like, I feel like sometimes people who are not people of color think that us as people of color are constantly walking around thinking about race. And that isn't true. It's like, we're just trying to live our lives just like you, but there are in this country, endless, unstoppable forces always pulling our race into our faces. Right. Like, it's so pervasive in the culture, you can't get away from it. Yeah. It's in advertising. It's in, some of the colloquialism sayings that we say, that we accept every day, that actually have a very racist history. It's, it's in microaggressions every day. It's in the news. If you're a student that's, a student of color applying to colleges right now, and you're watching the news, then you know that a bunch of privileged white kids' parents just bribed their kids' spot into elite colleges, taking that spot away from students that actually earned it. And
didn't even have to pay for bail to get out.
Didn't even have.
They just had to say, "I promise to come back to court."
Yes.
Is that not insane?
It's insane. And I promise you, they won't spend a day in jail. Like, I promise you, they will not. Like, it'll be a slap on the wrist. Things like that happening. And it's like, so even when you're trying to get away from it, there's always something lurking the second you open your eyes in the morning, reminding you of this. Like, I was really upset by that, because I remember when I got my acceptance letters for college, I had multiple white kids to my face tell me, oh, you only got accepted to that school because of affirmative action.
Ugh.
And I'm like, you, like, I did the work, motherfucker.
Did the work.
I was here every day. I did the homework. I was in AP classes.
Right.
I showed up for extra help when I needed help. I was on the debate team. I was in yearbook. I had a job that entire time. I played sports. Like, and you barely show up to school, and you think that you deserve to get into an elite college?
Right.
You like, so, even on a day like today, when I'm just like trying to mind my own business and trying to live my life and run my business and live, just do whatever. And the first bit of news is like, again, this college entrance scandal. And I'm like, I understand the anger of these kids because
Right.
I've been there.
And
we
also,
worked so hard.
If they couldn't get in on their own, especially like here in Los Angeles, your mother is an actress, your father is an actor, you guys are famous. If you can't get into an LA school off the fame of your parents and they have to pay a $500,000 to get you in, if that doesn't even work, like, you're not gonna survive there. Like, what's the point of bribing your way in? You're not gonna be able to make it. So like, and this is LA. Like, I live out here, so like, there's so many things you can get just by saying you're related to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing that this even had to happen. It's amazing that they didn't have to pay bail to get out. It's amazing that there's many Black mothers in prison or have felony charges because they lied about an address just so the kids can go to a school where they weren't afraid of their kids for having a lower education or whatever. Mm-hmm. Just like the unbalance, the inability for people to see the unbalance is the part.
It's willful, is what it is. It's willful ignorance.
It is willful ignorance, and you're just like, look at these two things that are exactly the same situation. Like, how can you not see it's the same? It's just, it's so frustrating and disappointing in humanity and all that kind of stuff. But we are getting close to the end, or a little bit over, which I don't mind because it was an awesome conversation. So trying to shake off the white people whiting thing. Let's talk about something that what do you love? The Caucasity, the adventures in Caucasia. What do you love about being mixed?
I think that it just affords me this level of freedom to be in different spaces and experience things in a very deep, authentic way that some people will never understand or experience. And although they might ally themselves or celebrate and support, it's not quite the same, I don't think. Right. So I definitely appreciate that there's such a rich history in my heritage that I can engage with and learn about and just be a part of. Is my favorite thing about it.
And especially too with your upbringing, getting to move around to all those different places and infusing your life with all those other different cultures too. However that manifests in your day-to-day is probably really awesome too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different thing. When people really get to know me, they're like, so wait, let me get this straight. So you're mixed. So you're half Black and you're half Latina, but like culturally you're both American and Arabian. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. That makes sense. Yeah, all of that.
That's awesome.
And they're like, so like you've lived in the Middle East. I'm like, yep.
That's so funny. That's awesome. I do. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And we didn't do like a pre-screen like I usually do, but I feel like this was just great. We just jumped right in and had a good old time. So I thank you for sharing your story with me and with the audience. Why don't you tell everybody how to find both your shows, where you are on social media, your website, everything.
Sure. So for podcasting, you can find me at That's What She Did podcast, which is available iTunes and Spotify and like all of the apps. And that's a show about the women leaders, rebels, and innovators you've probably never heard of, with a focus on women of color. So we tell those stories every Women's History Month. So as we're recording this, it's Women's History Month in March. And so we just launched Well, I just launched, I should say.
I do it too. I say we, even though it's just me.
It was me. I did it. I just launched season 3.
Take that credit. Take that, Black Girl Magic.
And it's doing really well. It just got an honorable mention by USA Today. So I encourage you to check out That's What She Did podcast. And in my business life, I'm by day a PR strategist, but mostly a health coach and personal trainer for women online and in person, helping them feel great in their bodies, get real about their health, and unleash their inner badass. And so I recently launched a podcast in the wellness space called the Skin You're In podcast, available again on iTunes, Spotify, all of the apps, pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Mm-hmm. So check that out. And you can find me on my website, TangiaRenee.com, with more information about what I do in my business services. On the gram is probably where I hang out the most. You can find me there.
The gram.
At like I have a gram for all of the things.
So do I. It's so exhausting.
But on Instagram, I'm probably mostly at HelloGorgeousFitness. So you can find me there on the Instagram, or you can find me at the Skin You're In pod on Instagram, or That's What She Did podcast on Instagram.
I love it.
Like so many things on Twitter and Tangia Renee, like all of the things. Like just put in Tangia Renee, all of the things will come up.
And I will put them in the show notes also for the audience. Well, again, thank you so much. This has been an awesome conversation. I'm hyped to hear that your show got spotted out or spotlighted. How did I say that all goofy like that? That your show got spotlighted on USA Today. I'm excited to see other women of color in this podcasting space, just like blowing past everything. It's so exciting when I see it, and I'm really happy. The only show of yours that I have listened to, though, is the Skin You're In, and the just like how transparent you are about your own experience and your own journey. I think really sets the tone for what they're going to get out of your show as you continue to listen on. And I know that you interview like experts in different areas and things like that. So it just seems like a really helpful and nice space to know that a woman of color is creating for other women of color, because we don't always translate with some of the other wellness things that are out there in the world. So I appreciate that from you as well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So for the Skin You're In podcast, since it's related to our conversation today, I am planning an episode that's about the cultural significance of food. And how that plays into our wellness. And so I haven't recorded it yet. It's just like on my planning list, but I'll get it done. And I'm gonna be talking about some of my personal experiences as being a mixed race woman of color and navigating food obligations and trying to get my fitness together at the same time.
Right. So. That's I'm sure everybody listening could appreciate that episode, because damn, sometimes it's rough.
Yeah. The struggle is
legit. Real. Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle Media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Sharmane Johnson. Music is by David Bogan, The One. And if you like what you heard on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes and wherever you find your podcasts. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.